Welcome back to Minds Matter, a podcast sponsored by the Monash Center for Consciousness and Contemplative Studies. I'm Beth.
And I'm Ava. And on Minds Matter, we explore research from neuroscience and psychology while occasionally talking through our own personal experiences.
And this week on the podcast, I spoke to Dr. Abhilasha Ravichander, who is a postdoctoral scholar at the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence. We kind of had a general episode on AI. So we spoke about what even is AI when we're talking about, is it just large language models? Are there different kinds of AI? We spoke about what are the exciting things to look forward to with the future in AI. What are some of the things we should look out for? The age-old question of will AI be able to become conscious, which I feel like we had some cool thoughts on. And then also looking at some of the data and safety issues around AI. So I think this is a really good overview, and I hope you guys enjoy.
Well, this was one of the episodes where I was basically like, wow, people are so smart and they know so many things. And I think in some ways, it kind of reminded me of some of the things I study, in the sense that, like, I'll study things that are very near and dear to us, like emotions that we experience all the time, that I think from the outside people think they have a really clear understanding of it. Maybe they don't. And I feel like I use ChatGPT every day. Do I know how it works? No. So I think listening to your conversation really made it clear that I kind of have a broad understanding of the idea that it's just kind of predictive models and it's just language that's put into these models, but that I really didn't know how it worked. And I think the question of how these models hallucinate and the problems that the models have was really interesting, because it is such a black box. And it was kind of comforting and scary to hear that the AI engineers and researchers also don't super 100% know what's going on. But I really liked when Abhilasha was talking about the kind of arc that AI has had over the course of the last, I guess, 100 years of, like, at first we were trying to train it with these kind of if-thens and these rule-based ways of thinking about problems that was kind of in line with how we were thinking about problems at the time, and how AI has really evolved to be like feeding on itself in a way that definitely wasn't happening in like the 60s, when people were doing this more rule-based type research. And since we're both not experts, I thought we could just take some time and do like semi-hallucinations, the two of us, and think about, like, I think we both have kind of differing views of what we think about AI and where we think it's going. So yeah, Abhilasha kind of talked about the past and like where we are now. So yeah, what do you think, Beth? I know that you love Terminator. So do you think that's where we're going? And I know that you very strongly believe that consciousness has to be tied to life. So where do you think that AI is going, given how fast we've gotten ChatGPT 3.5, 4.0?
Yeah, so this is one of the things I loved about this episode was one of the things I feel that's hard to work out when you're reading about AI is all of this like doom. Oh my God, everything's going to be terrible. We're all going to die. Or like, oh my God, it's going to be utopia. And it's like, is that really what's going on? And it's so hard, especially because, I mean, probably these AI companies, it's in their best interest to put out information like that. And I always feel like, wait, is that really what's going on? So one of the things I loved about this was getting to the bottom of what's going on, and it doesn't seem to be like either of those possibilities. It's like some in between thing. Like most things, something's going to be good, something's going to be bad, but we should just keep an eye on it. And the biggest concern is like the power of the big companies. Like that's like with everything, I suppose. But it's funny because I first got the idea to do an episode like this when I was visiting Ava this time last year, and we were sitting in her lounge room. And I, for some reason, and I just never thought of AI that much, or that like we had anything to worry about. And I don't know what I was thinking. I guess I just wasn't really thinking about it. And Ava starts telling me about how we have to really worry about like the end of days, kind of. Can you remember this?
No, I literally have no memory of this conversation at all.
Remember? And you're like, it's not that it'll become conscious, but it'll be that like it'll get in the wrong hands. And And I
Oh,
and then I
yes.
was saying to Ava, but wait, shouldn't we start panicking? And you were like, no, because there's nothing we can do about it either way, so we should just keep living like everything's fine. Can you remember that?
That sounds like me. I don't remember this exact conversation, but yeah, I think in general I have like that's my general nihilistic perspective on things.
Yeah, and then I was like, oh no, do I have to be really worried now? And and I'm like, oh no, Ava, do I have to worry about this now too?
Are
And
you worried?
no,
Okay, I love that for you.
I was for a minute, and then I feel like conversations like with Abhilasha, it's like, oh, we don't need to worry.
I think I don't know about worrying. I mean, I do feel that AI is a bit like, yeah, maybe I'm more of like a doom person about AI. I feel like it's a bit like the climate. Like it's happening. The bad things are happening. Things are happening. Okay, it's not all bad things. I think some wonderful things are happening. I use ChatGPT a lot, as I said. I love it. It makes things so much faster, and I think it has so many. It has the potential to basically free us as humans from like the boring stuff and like let us be creative. I think one of the dangerous parts is that I think more and more it feels like AI is doing the creative, interesting stuff and humans are not doing that, which I think is one danger. I do think that like AI is super powerful and that, as you said, like it's in some sense it's neutral, right? Like it's training itself, but we still ask it to do things. And it's not at the point where it's doing things on its own. Though, there have been like these scary case study things where people have said, have like tried to kind of like hack ChatGPT to like hack into itself and do things like that and do lots of scary things. And I have heard people say, oh, it's because a lot of it is not all of it, but a lot of it is open source that it's gonna be pretty hard to stop a couple of the crazy people who are going to do crazy things with it. So I think that definitely there's more dangers associated with AI. I mean, even now I just saw on the platform that we use to record, it said, do you want to create an AI voice of yourself? Did you see that? And I'm like,
Like,
that's what I'm trying to avoid. So things like that. And then I think that my thing with AI and tech in general is, and I guess this gets into consciousness, but I think that we're all just going to become like singularity. I think we're all just become one big mush of consciousness at some
sorry,
point.
what? You need to unpack that. 'Cause I don't-
Well, I think that because there's this framework in philosophy about, and I'm sure I'm butchering this, but about this idea of like the extended mind, and that's existed for a long time, which is this idea that like there's this idea that the mind is in your brain, and then other theorists were like, no, it's like in your brain and in your body, like this question of embodied cognition. So your mind doesn't end at your brain, it actually is, which in some ways makes sense, right? Like riding a bike is something that you do with your entire body, it's not just something that you remember in your brain. But then some people have taken it a step further and have said there's no reason to even say that your mind ends at your body, because a lot of the times, like when we're doing really tough cognitive tasks, like even not that tough, like if you're doing addition, sometimes if you write it down, you do 18 plus 18, you carry the one, like those types of things, you're doing that on paper. So in some ways that paper is part of your mind as well. And I think that's like getting very extreme with like even with Google already, but also with ChatGPT, right? When you're like going back and forth with ChatGPT to try to get you to solve a problem, or even like more analog, like you do that with your advisor, you do that with your friends when you're trying to figure something out. Like some people say that it's like one mind in a sense when you're co-constructing how you're thinking about something. And I think with AI, especially, when we start getting those chips implanted into our brains, we're going to have access to so much so quickly that it will be hard to separate your brain and your consciousness from whatever you have implanted in your mind, which is like pretty close to what we have on our phones. It's just that it would be happening more quickly and like neurally rather than just with your fingers typing things, which would just be a faster process of what we already have. But then at some point, I think it would kind of blur the lines between your thoughts and what you know and what other people like and what the cloud knows. And I think if everyone is at that phase where everyone is getting access to similar information, then hive mind. And I don't know if like the robots will take over. I think that we will all become robots.
And do you see that it's happening in our lifetime?
I don't know, because I think I would have said no like 2 years ago, but I was really shocked with how far ChatGPT came when it came out. So I would have
Okay,
said no, but now I truly don't know. And like you said, I'm along for the ride. We'll see what happens, and no need to worry about it for now.
but so with this hive mind robots, you have to then be in the camp of embodied cognition, and not everyone is. So I think that's an important thing. So this idea that our mind is also the table, or whatever, you have to be like in that camp of belief, and not everyone is. So I think that's important to say, that that's not everyone believes that
Yeah,
this is the way the mind works.
that's
uh,
true.
so
But
I think that,
I think that once, because I mean already people kind of have this idea that like in some ways it's becoming more apparent that like our thoughts aren't our own, with the fact that just online we're in these echo chambers, right? That like, and that's, I mean, that's really similar to like it's in a more extreme version of communities that we have
Mhm.
in person, right? That like if your friends think in a certain way, that's going to influence how you think, but online that just is amplified. But I think then, and but you're still able to remove yourself like from those situations, right? And
Mhm.
kind of
Right.
see the real world. Some people maybe less than others. But I think then if we're at a point where everyone has access to the internet in a second, so like you're not typing a question, right? Like you just think a thought like what's what's the population of Portugal, and immediately it's in your mind, and you have that information without actually having to search for it, then at that point people will kind of, then I do think then it's hard to say that the mind is just in your brain if literally the information that you have is automatically accessed through the
Mhm.
internet or whatever cloud it is. And then I think at that point it does become extended cognition in a more compelling way, because of the, maybe just by virtue of how fast the information would be. All of this is obviously just like essentially like a Black Mirror episode or something, but these are things that I feel like we're going towards, especially with like the Neuralinks and like the chips and whatever.
Yeah.
Like that's what it seems like people want to do,
Yeah,
and
I
it will be
think
hard to fight.
it's I don't think I'll ever get a chip implanted, but who knows. But what I was going to say is, I really understand what you're saying, and it does all seem very scary. But if you
Not necessarily scary. That's the thing. I think we
right,
can
right, right,
say,
right.
okay,
But what I guess I find hard is that if you think about what these large language models are doing, which is just like predicting words, that's not how we think. So I guess that there seems such a big difference between how we, as the differences that we were speaking about, like it doesn't have this memory, and it doesn't have this context, and it can't work out sarcasm. And the way we think isn't just predicting. It isn't like we have a mass of words and we just predict the best one to say next. And I guess because the information is stored in this other way, it feels like it won't ever become one or whatever, because there's this big disconnect about how it comes about. Does that make sense?
yeah, I definitely agree. Although I think that some people might argue that actually we are just, predictive processors in a different way. I know that, I mean, it's just with the LLMs, it's really just language and predicting what's coming
Yeah.
next in a sentence or in like a logic flow that you're building. But I think that a lot of people argue that we are like statistical machines, and that we're just predicting the optimal thing that's coming next, including in what we're saying. And I do think that it feels like, I guess, like the Freudian ego or whatever. Like there's like a me that has an oversight over what
Mhm.
I'm saying, even if it's trying to predict what's coming next. But I do think that there is something to be said about, maybe there is part of this like statistical way of thinking that is also ingrained in us. And like that's why we do what we do in some ways. But then, so I think some hardcore people could argue with you about that. I don't feel knowledgeable enough to have that argument, but I do think there's something statistical in how we think. But then I also think even if the LLMs, and this obviously isn't the final form of AI, but I think even if the LLMs aren't the way that we think, if we got to a point where we could have constant access to an LLM at all times, then it doesn't matter if that's not the way that we think, because like it would essentially be like a fusion between human and LLM, right? Which I
I
think doesn't
see.
mean that like we are AI, but like we become like a different
Right.
thing that's like still alive. but is still like, we definitely like get to a different level of intelligence, because as you talked about in this episode, right, like already LLMs are so good at doing some things that we're so bad at and that we physically are unable to do, and we can do things right now that LLMs can't do, and it seems like it's possible that we might fuse.
Okay, well, there's on that. So I'm really not convinced by this, but then what's the difference to when we're driving a car? Like, are we also the car? Like, I don't know. It just feels
Yeah,
we
I
are.
think some people might argue that we're the car.
Oh, okay. Well, then that was like, oh, well, we've achieved this merge of super speed.
Yeah, I think so, right? I mean, I think it's also just like the context in which we use this, right? So I think in a situation, I think it's easier to say, okay, like, and obviously this is all like if we were able to have a chip where we're constantly able to access the internet, which the tech there is also super far away. That's like completely different tech than AI. But if we were in that situation and we constantly had this chip, right? If we had like, instead of getting into a car, if we were always in the car, then we always would have the capability to go that fast. But it's just that we get out of the car.
So you think that then if we were always in cars, that would be a part of us?
Yeah.
That's funny. I guess, yeah, I guess I don't feel that.
I think, I mean, what do you feel about your phone? How do you feel about your phone?
I don't feel like it's me.
I don't feel like my phone is me, but I think it's like a fundamental part of how I think. And I think without my phone and without my computer, I would think in a very different way than I do now. And I
I
think
guess
that would
that's true.
influence at some point, if we want to get into that, like who I am, because it's such an integral part of what I do every day and the way in which I process information.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I guess I need it to find everywhere I go. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the problem with the chips would be also who's going to have, like, so we're not all going to have access to them. So I guess the problem is going to be
Yeah.
probably like the most wealthy, powerful people will have access to the chips, and then they'll have this ability to have more intelligent. Yeah, I guess that's probably the issue, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's just like the one potential world where it's like the end of the human race as we know it, is like everyone has these chips that somehow are able to access all the information ever. And then, yeah, would we even want human bodies? Probably not. Anyway, that's a different discussion. This is just a
But I
sci-fi
mean,
episode. But
if we're doing that, like we have poverty to solve. I don't know.
yeah,
I guess I see so many issues facing humanity at the moment. I find it hard
to
to
believe that we'll
see.
ever get there.
Yeah, does
Yeah.
that make sense?
No, I think you're right. And I I think that every time we have new technology that benefits people, rich people use it first
Yeah.
in whatever ways, like lots of different types of technology, like even plastic surgery. Like rich
Yeah,
people use plastic surgery and that just increases their influence and power.
true.
And I think that if there were something like this, I don't know. I think that's also an interesting discussion of like, would rich people use it first or would they get assistance to use it to make sure that it works? And then we could have a Lucy situation on our hands. Have you seen that movie?
What's Lucy?
Oh my god, it's really bad. It's like the premise is insane. It's a Scarlett Johansson movie. Shout out Scarlett Johansson. She's also in Her. She's in so many excellent films, some better than others. But Lucy is based on the premise that we of course all know as neuroscientists that we only use 10% of our brain at once.
Mm-hmm.
And so
That's
it's
not
about
true,
that's
everyone.
not true. Yes, that's not true, as a disclaimer. And it's about what would happen if you used 100% of your brain.
What does she do?
I don't want to spoil it. I'll tell Beth, but if you don't want to hear this, skip ahead like 15 seconds. But basically at the end she turns into a computer. She like becomes a computer. She like literally builds herself into a computer and like disappears.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
No one worry about that. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, we do use
Yeah.
100% of our brains at once. I don't even remember why we were talking about this.
Yeah, I'm not really sure either. But I guess the thing is with all this, I guess the other thing I find hard with all this stuff is where the tech actually at is so far from all of this. I guess that's the other thing.
Yeah.
Like, and and although we're moving at a really fast rate, and I acknowledge that, the jumps in knowledge we're going to have to understand to go to these next extreme steps are massive. Will we ever be able to do that? I'm not even really sure.
That's true.
That's
Yeah.
the thing I always feel like. I'm like, yeah, okay, we're moving at this fast rate. Oh, wow, it's crazy, whatever. But then if you think about what we're going to have to understand about the brain and the mind, and we're so far from doing that. I'm really sorry, but like, as neuroscientists, I think the thing we know is like, we don't really know much at all.
Yeah.
No one ever wants to talk about that. Like, we're
Yeah.
kind of, we're kind of in the dark. I mean, yeah, we know something's going on, but there's so much stuff we just don't know.
I definitely agree. And I feel that I know nothing. But I also think that it's disturbing how fast, like, yes, on the one hand, but then it's disturbing how fast and like how good these models that we don't understand are. And I think it's totally true. Like, we right now are not at the phase where we're having like chips being able to do much in our brains, or that's even safe. But it just feels like the jump in the last 20 years, as someone who is like outside of this, was really not I wasn't expecting it to go that way. And it felt like for, I guess, like 50s to 60s, 70s, like when it was those if then like rule-based learning, that felt like it got nowhere. And then suddenly, it was like 20 years later, 40 years later, we have chatbots, and then the chatbots can do all my homework. Like, that was unheard of. So I think it's true that we're far from a lot of what, like, maybe true, I don't even want to call it intelligence, because I think a lot of these things are intelligent just in like different ways than we are, but like really scary consciousness. Like, I think Abhilasha was right in that, like, the question of consciousness is not the question to be asking right now for a variety of reasons, but I think it's hard to say it's not coming, because
I don't know.
I think we just don't know. I think
Yeah, I think
the
that's the
best we can
thing.
be is agnostic about what's happening. But I think if it were to come, then I think we will all become robots. Although, yeah, I think some people might become robots before us. And maybe they will just want a class of like working under lords. What are those called? Not lords. Like working lower classes to make things. But then why would they use humans? So inefficient, you know?
The other thing is on this, wait, oh God, my brain's thinking about so many things. Overlords,
Sorry.
tech. We've also both had stressful weeks, so I feel like this is maybe not the best things to be talking about. Um,
No, because then we won't
demise,
matter at all.
demise of humanity. Oh damn, I forgot I really did have a good point. What were we talking about?
AI overlords.
Oh, that's what I wanted to say.
Oh, great.
Sometimes when the tech companies put out these,
Mm.
oh my God, look what this thing can do. Oh my God, look what that thing can do. And if you actually know, so what it's like, and it can look really scary and insane and like, wow. And actually it's very simple behind the scenes and not that
Yeah.
impressive. That's what I
Yeah,
wanted
like
to
the
say.
Amazon grocery store.
That's exactly what I was, thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was like Amazon had these grocery stores that seemed amazing, and like it was like AI could track what you were getting, but really it was like they were paying people in the global south like 2 cents an hour or something to just be tracking you all the time and just be looking at exactly what you were doing. So it was actually humans doing it with a lot of human power. But I don't know. I think maybe I'm just like still like naively in awe of what these LLMs can do, because I'm super impressed by them. I know they're fallible, but they're pretty damn good.
Didn't Amazon also do something where like we can predict what you want, but basically it was just looking at brain activity in an MRI. It was just like looking at some brain activity, but it wasn't that impressive because we know that we can look at that already and say someone wants a drink or something. I feel like there was another sort of gimmick like that. Like we
Mm,
can read your, like the reading minds gimmicks.
yes. Yeah, and I think Neuralink has also been like, oh, look at all these amazing things we've been doing, and people in academia have done those things before. So I think that that's true. But I think, multiple things. can be true at the same time. Like, I think it's super impressive where we've got, but I think you still need to kind of do your research about what is happening behind the scenes, and sometimes that information is just hard to find, which is maybe the biggest issue, which luckily Abhilasha is doing. But yeah, I think this is probably like the only, well, I don't know if you're more optimistic than me. I think this is probably the only thing where I'm like, yeah, I think we're progressing and we're going to get there, and like, it's probably going to be bad, but it's
That
bad
doesn't
now. And you're like, oh no, nothing's gonna go wrong.
maybe I'm just in denial.
I
Maybe
don't know.
I'm like in those books, the people who like never do the tech thing, you know.
I just think I wish that we'll have this now, but I wish like 5 years ago we had recorded something, because did we know each other 5 years ago? Did we? Yeah.
No, we didn't. We met September 2019.
Well, when we met, when you were like super depressed, I should have been like, what do you think about AI, Beth?
I should be like, get me out of here.
That would have been your last straw.